Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Alex Lupi. I'm a second-year medical student at Vanderbilt University School of Medicine. I also sit on the Medical Student Section's Committee on Legislation and Advocacy. Today we have a programming on medical student debt as a fireside chat between myself and our speakers. Our learning objectives today are first to become familiar with current changes to loan repayment during the COVID-19 pandemic. Second, to understand future options for loan repayment, including proposed policy solutions for reducing loan burden, public service loan forgiveness and potential improvements to its structure, and finally, living frugally in refinancing. I'm really excited to introduce our speakers today. First, we have Miss Alexis Pierce. She is originally from Colorado. She went to Loyola Marymount for her undergraduate education and then switched coasts and attended law school at the George Washington University. After law school, she went on to work at the Board of Veteran Appeals and at Powers, Piles, and Sutter and Verville PC. She is currently working for the AMA as a senior attorney within the Division of Legislative Counsel. In this role, she focuses on multiple areas of health law and policy, including the scope of practice, immigration, and graduate medical education. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Pierce. Next, we have Dr. Heather Smith. Dr. Smith lives in Newport, Rhode Island with her fiance, John, and her charcoal lab, Barley. She is an obstetrician and gynecologist at the Women and Infants Hospital and serves as an assistant professor at Brown University. She's active in both undergraduate and graduate medical education. She treats patients from all over Rhode Island and works on the L&D floor, in the OR, and in the ED. Dr. Smith was the GRAF in 2005 and 2006 and has since been active in health policy for the past 15 years. She served on multiple committees at the state and national level. She worked as a fellow in the U.S. Senate Health Committee and in the Connecticut State House. Currently, she serves on the Council on Legislation for the AMA, as well as the Committee for Government Affairs for the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. She is now the current president-elect for the AMA Foundation. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Smith. All right, so I'm going to stop my screen share. And we will just go forward with this fireside chat. The format will be, I'll just ask a question directed to one of our speakers, and then we'll kind of all talk about it until we feel like we've discussed it enough, and we'll move on. So first, I have a question for Ms. Pierce. So there have been a number of important changes implemented by both the Trump and Biden administrations to give relief to student loan borrowers during the pandemic. Can you talk about suspension of interest and payments on federal student loans and how long these policies are expected to last?
Yes, I can, thanks. So there has been a suspension on payments and interest that's supposed to last until September 30th of this year, so you wouldn't have to start making your payments again until October. There is a potential that it could be extended longer. I mean, we've seen that done a few times. The Trump administration extended it, and then the Biden administration followed in suit. However, it's going to be really dependent on what the economic situation is at the time. If we continue to recover at the rate that we are and how things are going, I really doubt that there's going to be another extension. So I would say if you have the ability to pay off your loans now or start to, this is a great time because of that 0% interest. You're going to be able to get a lot more bang for your buck, and more of that money is going to go towards your principal. So it's going to really help you start to get rid of that balance more quickly. And let's see. For example, if there is anything that does forgive some sort of student loan debt, like we've had a couple of, senators, particularly Senator Warren saying that she would like, $50,000 or more worth of debt forgiveness given. There was a provision passed within the American Rescue Plan Act that said that any of those things that may or may not happen in the future, all the way up until 2026, would be forgiven and not counted towards taxable income. So if any of those bills do pass through, you don't have to pay tax on it and you just get to enjoy the benefits.
Great, thank you, Ms. Pierce, for clarifying on that. So Dr. Smith, I want to shift a little bit to public service loan forgiveness. This is a really popular program, and according to the 2020 AMC survey of graduating MD students, 44.9% said that they intend to pursue public service loan forgiveness. There's been a lot of talk recently about how there are actually really low rates of forgiveness due to the pretty stringent guidelines for payments. So could you just talk about public service loan forgiveness as a potential program, and then also other programs that are out there for work-based loan repayment?
Absolutely. And again, thank you for having me here and get to talk to all y'all. So in terms of the public service loan forgiveness, you have to make a certain number of qualified payments over time. And unfortunately, even if you do that and follow all the rules, what we're seeing is that not everybody then has the remainder of their loans forgiven. Um, I think one thing to think about is if you're going to be doing this anyways, great. You can go find that job and try to apply for this. If you follow the guidelines online, it's not that much more difficult to pay these back for your federal loans. But if you're deciding between jobs where one would be eligible and one is not, and there perhaps might be a significant income difference, I would also kind of try to extrapolate out what that difference in income could be and what that could mean, because there might be a chance that you could take the job that isn't your ideal job, possibly have a lower income, and still not get that forgiveness after 10 years. And so we want to make sure that everyone goes into this fully informed and that they're thinking about not just those moments when you're paying it back with the potential of forgiveness, but also don't forget that potential earned as well. And then also, if you're making more money, you also have more to put into savings. And one of the most important things I learned, and unfortunately a little bit too late, is about compounded interest. And just like it can hurt you on your loan, it can help you in your savings. And so sometimes you have to think about not just what is this monthly payment, but what is it going to, if I can take a little bit and save it down the road, how will that help me in 20 years more than the potential of paying off my loans? Now, I will give full disclosure. I have been paying into the 10 years of the forgiveness, and I did not, even though it was fully served, my loans were not forgiven. So I will give that background to what I'm talking about. Granted, I would not have made any difference in my choices of where I work or what I have done due to that. So I do not feel that I have lost anything based on that. I just did not want anyone else to not go in with the open eyes completely. In terms of other options though, one of the things that I was able to do, my fellowship was the RWJ fellowship in clinical scholars program. So although it was a non-clinical fellowship, I was focused on research and I was able to apply and be awarded the NIH loan repayment. And that actually awarded me $35,000 a year off of my loans for 2 years. That was huge. Now you have to remember, if you get something like that, it is taxable income. And so you have to remember to put money aside to pay taxes on that, which is important because you don't want to then benefit from something and then hurt down the road. Other things are a VA program where once you start working, if you give time to a VA site, you have then a certain amount of your loans forgiven. Additionally, there is the National Health Service Corps, and then there are some states as well. I know I went to University of Massachusetts, and there is a state-based forgiveness loan that if you work in Massachusetts, whether it be in a primary care position or in an underserved area, you actually have part of your loans forgiven. There are many other states that have that. There are also, just not to forget though, also scholarships. And I would be remiss if I did not remind everyone of the AMA Foundation Physicians of Tomorrow Scholarship. It's for all rising graduates of medical school. And it's $10,000 per person, which is a wonderful, although not as big as we all need, but is something substantial. And there are many other scholarships out there. And so don't forget to keep applying to those throughout. I actually set up a reminder and an alert on a scholarship website that helped to remind me when every month I would look for new scholarships that I could apply to, just to reduce that debt as well. I hope that was helpful, Alex. Please let me know if there's anything else I can add.
No, that's really helpful. Yeah, and thank you for sharing your experience with the public service loan forgiveness. I can imagine that's really frustrating. So I think that is a good thing for people to know. Um, we had talked a little bit about that there are, there are bills that have been proposed. People have talked about trying to make that easier, but it hasn't happened yet. So that is something we're definitely hoping for, to make those requirements less stringent, make that more feasible for people to actually get that forgiveness after making those 120 payments, which is just brutal to make all of that and not get that forgiveness. Okay, Ms. Pierce, we're going to shift a little bit to, besides just the work-based forgiveness programs like public service loan forgiveness or working for the VA or the NIH programs. What are the other bills and policies that the AMA is tracking with, advocating for, just that are offering other kinds of relief through the policy proposals for the student loan burden?
Yeah, sure. So one of them is called the Retirement Parity for Student Loans Act. And this would allow employers to contribute towards their employees' retirement. So most places, like if you have a match, for example, so a 4% match or 5% match is pretty typical if you're putting that in, and not actually have that money go towards their retirement, but instead allow them to pay into their student loan forgiveness while your employer puts into your retirement. So that way you don't have to forego having a little bit of money go in both directions, because it's been shown that a lot of people have been putting off, especially in our generation, saving for retirement because they're feeling that extra burden um, of student loan like debt relief. So actually, yeah, something about 74% of people in 2018 had said that they were putting it off until their student loans were repaid. So that would be a nice way to give you a little bit of cushion there. We also are talking about the Student Loan Forgiveness for Frontline Health Workers Act. So if you were a frontline worker during COVID, this would allow you to have your student loans forgiven through this specific program if this bill is passed, which would be a huge amount of relief because they are considering forgiving your entire student loan that you have at that point in time. So that could be a really big relief for those physicians who are out there working tirelessly for us right now, which would be great. And also the Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act, which would help to sort of bring more individuals. These are more like bringing more people into the workforce sort of thing. So that would be like helping more people be able to claim unused visas for our IMG students, physicians, and use those visas currently in this next calendar year or so to come in and have those extra visas to be in the country, which for some people that's a lifesaver because they may have gone through the J1 physician and been here this whole time and want to work to pay back their student loans here in the United States with that expected salary rate and then have to go home instead. So this could really help those sorts of students who are struggling and stressed out about that sort of stability within their life. Also, the Strengthening America's Healthcare Readiness Act, which would provide additional funding for the National Health Service Corps. But I do have to say that we recently have had a huge influx of money go into the National Health Service Corps through the Consolidated Appropriations Act. So hopefully that's going to make it so that so many more students can benefit not only from the loan forgiveness that offers, but also from the scholarship up front. So, you don't even have to take those loans in the first place, which would be, awesome. So if you can get that and that's something you want to do, I would highly recommend that because it pays not only for your tuition, but also for things like reasonable education costs, room and board, and then a living stipend. So you could really get out of med school with basically no debt if you decide to go that route. And now there's even more funding to make those slots, available for those students, which would be awesome. And then we also have one that provides additional fundings for the Rural America Health Corps Act. So if you're willing to go in and serve in a rural area, but you don't want to do the National Health Service Corps program, this is another option for you to get that. If you make a 5-year commitment, they're going to pay a large portion of your student loans off for you if you're willing to work in those rural and underserved communities, which, just helps, the community as much as the physician who's receiving that loan relief.
That is really helpful to hear about all of those bills and policies. One follow-up I have to that is with the additional influx of funding into the National Health Service Corps, could you just clarify the difference between the National Health Service Corps and public service loan forgiveness? What the different requirements are, how long you would be working, where you're working, just the difference between those two programs.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So the public service loan forgiveness, you have to make 120 qualifying payments, which usually equates to 10 years. You can, it could be more than 10 years, like maybe you stop and you work somewhere else for a year and make a little more money and then come back into the payment. That's okay. But you do have to be on you have to have federal loans and you have to be on a certain repayment plan. So you have to be doing it based upon your income, an income-based repayment plan is what that's called. And you can work at any qualifying employer though. So that means pretty much any US federal, state, or local government official, most nonprofit organizations, but not all, so make sure you check. And you have to be working full-time, which for them means at least 30 hours a week. So I'm sure you guys are gonna be working way more than 30 hours a week. That's not a problem. But the biggest problem I would say is just making sure that you are working for a qualifying employer for the public service loan forgiveness program. That's where some people run into issues, I believe. And also, take into account that if they say they're in the process of becoming a qualified employer, if it happens, that's great. You'll get back, counted months for that. But if they don't get approved, you've just lost all that time. So just, I don't know, be aware. For the National Health Service Corps, there are two ways you can do it. One, you can do a loan repayment, which they give you $50,000 for 2 years of service, and you have to go into one of the high need areas, and you have to be within a certain specialty, like a high need specialty or a primary care. And you commit that time, you go in and you serve, and then you get that additional money towards your loan repayment. You can also get it on the front end though, and you can get the scholarship version of the National Health Service Corps, which will provide you with up to 4 years of tuition, room and board, reasonable living expenses, things like helping you pay for your books, like all of that is included. It's a really it's a pretty awesome opportunity. You're basically going to med school for free. And then you have to retroactively agree to go and serve in those high need areas, just like you would for the loan repayment program. So you're still going into those high need service areas. You're still within those specialties. But if you already know that you're willing to work in a low need area, and you already know that you're willing to work in one of those specialties or as a primary care physician, this could be a great way to get you out without any form of debt. And then you can start doing those things like we talked about earlier, putting your money towards retirement, getting the benefits of all that compound interest and being able to have just your income entirely for yourself. So
that really helps. I feel like just the words and the names of these programs can be so similar that they all sound like the same thing. So understanding the difference between public service loan forgiveness and National Health Service Corps is super helpful. So thank you for clarifying that. So I'm going to go back to Dr. Smith. And what I've always heard is this phrase of living like a resident. And that is, what the common advice is for after you come out of medical school with your loans, and you just need to live like a resident for X amount of years and it'll all be fine. I think that could potentially be the advice of prior generations though, as like the new numbers show that the median sum of debt for graduating MD students was $200,000, even higher for DO graduates, $233,000. And this is rising almost every year. And obviously that's the median. There's plenty of students out there graduating with $400,000 in debt. And we talked about the interest rates earlier. You could be, spending most of your salary on your interest to break even. So what do you think about this traditional advice, other advice to refinance, consolidate loans? Can you just walk us through your thoughts on those?
Sure. So I think we can't forget about live like a resident. That still has to be part of what we do, because we're not going to increase our budget. And unfortunately, right now, we're not going to decrease our overall loan burden. So there are ways, though, to be smart to live like a resident. One is know your budget. We are so good at numbers and stats, but we don't use it for ourselves. We only use it for our patients and our businesses. So let's use it for ourselves. Let's create a budget. Know where our money goes. You can't manage what you don't measure. So that's one thing. Part of that is also seeing where you can decrease some of those costs. There are going to be some fixed costs, but let's be smart about what those are. Know that maybe you don't want to buy the BMW when you graduate medical school. That's not something I ever even thought about or had a choice of, but there are some people like, oh, I'm a doctor, I'm going to get my doctor's car. But also think about where you're living. That might even start when you're choosing residency. Know the cost of living of the places that you're going. Training is really important, but many places will give you an excellent training. Sometimes you also have to put into that equation where you're going and if you can afford it. Or so living somewhere in the Midwest or in a more rural area is going to have less costs associated than living in one of the big cities on the coasts. Now, only you know what your values are for your residency, but you should also include part of that, not just where you're going for training, but where you're going to be living for at least 3 years, if not 10. And so make that part of your equation. The other part is, what can you do to decrease those costs? Sometimes it's cheaper to rent. Maybe you have to find roommates. Sometimes it's actually cheaper to buy. And there are physician mortgages that will allow you to get full financing without a % down payment, and also not to have PMI or insurance that you have to pay if you pay less than a 20% down. And those are great options. They know that doctors going into residency are going to have an income. They just might not have had one yet. And so that they're relying on that and give you that opportunity. The other part of living a little bit below your means in residency is finding all those things that can help you. Sometimes going on SNAP is not a bad thing. It'll cover many of your food costs and lower those fixed numbers. The other part of that is, what can you do during that time to also take advantage of other items? So there are some residencies that allow for moonlighting, and you have to decide if that's right for you. For me, I was already working a number of hours, and so I was not able to physically do moonlighting, and I don't think I would provide the care that those patients deserved without that amount of sleep. And there are some programs that don't even allow moonlighting as an option. Also, while credit cards can be a slippery slope, find a credit card that has a good gift to it. So whether it be points or cash back, maybe if you know that you have to travel to stay sane, get a travel awards card. Make sure it has a low annual amount, but that might be the way you fund your travel and not have to spend your savings on it. Or get a cash back, where you know you spend a certain amount on groceries every month, and you can then refund part of that every month and save money that way. So I think there are ways to decrease the costs, but I also think you're right that this is not going to be something that we can maintain if it continues in this trajectory. And so we also have to start thinking, what else can we do to decrease this loan burden in general? Now, it's not going to be for me, it's not going to be for you, but it might be for the next decade of medical students. And that's where I've seen the AMA doing some really good things. And part of these stem from resolutions coming from the medical students, the section. And so for that, I'm very grateful. You guys have always been the most creative and what I call the heart of the AMA. And so where we're looking at new pathways for GME and UME funding, we're looking at how do you be more efficient with your medical education? Is there a way so that everyone can get that second degree if they choose to, and still have that part of the already existing loan burden, so that we can be better physicians on a public health arena or in the business world, and get that additional education that we need, but not have to take time off from working and take additional student loans. There are other parts also that I think are important that goes along with living like a resident. Too often, I know for myself, I was very much focused on the month to month. How do I get by? And I forgot about that down the road. And I think Alexis had referred to this really wisely. You have to still think about your savings. You have to still think about your retirement. You might not be able to put $1,000 a month. You might not be able to put $500 a month, but maybe it's $50 a month into savings or retirement. That compounded interest will, when you finally get to your job, will help you down the road. The one other thing I want to comment on, I know you had asked specifically about refinancing, and so I think right now, if you have a federal loan, it's important to realize that you can take advantage of that 0 interest rate, either pay down your principal or take what you would have paid and put it, oops, sorry, I hit my camera, or take that amount that you would have paid and put it into savings or put it into your retirement, because the student loans right now are so low. And my cutoff usually is 4%. If your current interest is under 4%, you're going to get more in the market. And so you'll gain more than you're going to be paying off down the road. And so that's one thing to think about. The other part of that is, if you refinance, be careful, because when you refinance, it usually is through a private lender. And that means that you lose all those benefits of having a federal loan, including this 0% interest that's currently being offered through the executive order. I hope that answered your question and didn't go too far astray.
No, that's a great answer. And so what I'm hearing is, yes, living like a resident is still part of the advice. You still have to do that. You can't just throw that away, but we have to be creative with policy and with our own, personal situations of how to go beyond just that. Because, you could, if you have $400,000 or $500,000 in loans, you could live like a resident all you want, and it can be 20 years before you pay off your loans.
Exactly.
All right. The last question I have, because we're close to time, is how do you think that the increasing load burdens are impacting students from families with less generational wealth, and similarly limiting diversity in our physician workforce? We know this is an issue that we're trying to work on, but this is just a major factor that is moving in completely the wrong direction.
Absolutely. We're seeing the dichotomy exacerbated each year, where not only is the average loan burden increasing, but we're also seeing that those who are entering the medical field, that the disparities are growing. And we believe that this is absolutely directly related. And part of that is a number of families and cultures have not grown up where loans and debt is a positive thing. Sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. But if you don't have family wealth and you're not going to be going, and you don't know how to manage that there is an aspect of positive debt, then medical school is not going to be a viable option in your mind. And we need to both decrease that debt burden, but also help recognize that there is an idea of some sort of healthy debt. Part of that is also not just the familial or the cultural perception, but it's also those of what your exposure is. If you have not been exposed to other doctors in your family or as your neighbors, and you haven't seen that they are able to survive with that debt, or at least live. And so I think that also can restrict how you perceive this as a possible option. So I think there are two parts to that. Is one, we obviously have to bring down the debt for so many reasons, and this is an important reason. But we also have to be able to show how this debt can be manageable. And I think part of that is also then fulfilling and sustaining that pipeline of people who actually can consider medical school a viable option. But that doesn't start at medical school. That actually doesn't even start at college. That starts at middle school and high school. And that's where we as the AMA can also add our voice and our influence. And I think Doctors Back to School is an excellent way of doing that. I also think that we can work through our community health centers as well. And so I think there are a number of ways of bringing the ability to become a doctor is a viable one, to those communities who don't realize that. And I think those are the very communities that we need to also represent as physicians. So we need to be able to have people to come and want to be doctors and see it as a viable option. I wish that there was a very easy answer to that, but I think at least we're identifying one of the roots of the problem so we can start to address it, because the disparities in who we represent as physicians is just going to exacerbate our patients' outcome disparities as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really well said, of the kind of the intersectionality of all those issues. So thank you so much, Dr. Smith, Ms. Pierce. This is a great learning opportunity. I think we really nicely covered where we are with the student loans with the COVID pandemic. And then moving forward, after we kind of lose this little holiday of the 0% interest, no payments, things going forward, the bills in Congress, and then how to really, tailor your own personal life with the options that are out there for work-based repayment, living like a resident, and then thinking big for the future of how to make medical education more accessible and have a better and more diverse physician workforce. The last thing I'll plug is, if you just Google AMA loans, there's good website links. If you Google AMC loans, they have a bunch of calculators and helpful tips. So definitely check out those sites of all the resources that have been compiled. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope this was helpful, and see you later.